Hello and welcome to New York Empire Podcast presented by Greatest Ultimate Bag. I'm Hilton and he's Matt Pippin Auletta. And today we are talking all about the New York Empire's 24-19 win in the East Division Final over the DC Breeze. There are some major things to hit today and we'll get to the defense, but we have to start, Matt, by talking about the Empire offense because I could get lost in the numbers here. So let's try to fully comprehend this. Before we do any of it, just initial impressions from you from this game, being an offensive player, watching what the Empire offense did.
That wasn't offense. It was magic. I don't really know what else to say about that. One of the turnovers, the Callahan, was like Rushmeyer barely picks it up, probably hesitated for 1 sec because he saw the defender close. Then he's like, no, I can make this throw. And then like that split second, everybody has that like brain fart on occasion. He just happened to do it in the end zone. Like you just write that turnover off. Okay, whatever. That's one turn. Actually, so be it.
If you're bringing that up, we're not throwing blame around here, but I talked to enough of the players to know, I'm not going to say the name, someone on that line was originally selected to catch that disc. And someone in Rushmeyer Bailey, if you watch back, was on the other side of the line. And someone on that line said, I don't want to catch it. So Rushmeyer Bailey ran all the way from one sideline to the other sideline to pick up that disc, and then in rhythm attempted, as you said, to immediately throw it. So when we provide blame, there's an unknown O-line player that talking to multiple players needs like 45% of the blame, and then 2 or 3 others are going to take the other 20% or something if I did my numbers right. So just to defend Solomon a little bit, multiple sources told me that one player was like, nah, at this time, it's not going to happen. And sometimes your teammates do set you up to fail a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes it just happens. Little laps and whatever. One turnover, so be it. And then the other one was Ben Katz threw to John Randolph. I couldn't tell from my vantage point via the stream. I thought maybe he tipped it. Like the throw wasn't perfect, but it looked like pretty close. I actually thought maybe that would get scored as a drop. I don't know if you had a better look at that. But either way, it wasn't like an egregious throwaway or something terrible or whatever. So again, another like razor thin margin on another turn. And then there was one other turn, which might have been a buzzer beater. I'm not 100% certain. I don't recall. But either way, you're talking like 3 turnovers, 2 of which were probably easily avoidable. I mean, it's perfection. That's all you can say.
Well, the Katz to Randolph one was the reminder, I think, that the wind existed because the throw wasn't perfect and the wind took it at the last second. There just wasn't enough spin on it. So the wind took it at the last second and it hit off Randolph's hands and he's going to catch that 9 times out of 10. But again, for me up in the booth, that's what it was. It was like, oh, right. The wind is like kind of much worse than it usually is at that field. So it was kind of a swirling wind. And the Empire made you completely forget about that because, yes, here are the numbers. New York set the single game record for fewest turnovers in a game, 4, as they clinched their second straight East Division crown and 28th straight win. They actually could have turned it over twice more to 6 turnovers, and that would still tie the all-time record. So they beat the all-time record by 2 full turnovers. By winning at home, too, it will mean that they have not lost at home in at least 6 years come 2024 when that season starts. So that second part is about the whole project, but again, just to focus on the game itself, because again, the whole referendum on words like dynasty, on the theme of chasing history, that stuff will come at the end of the season, sure. But just talking about this game, 12 of 13 on hucks, 17 of 21 holds, 7 of 8 D-line conversions, 15 of 15 in the red zone, 4 turnovers, 1 every quarter. Here's the big ones. No Jeff Babbitt, no John Lithio, no Jack Williams for part of the second half. And on the other side of that, this DC defense was just one of 6 teams in AUDL history to allow less than 17 scores per game. It's DC this year, the Hustle this year, the Empire last year, the Breeze in 2021, the Radicals in 2014. And the only team to hold opponents to less than 15 this season, or any season, was this year's New York Empire at 14.3 scores per game against. New York's offense was facing one of the statistically greatest defenses in league history, with the added motivation of going out and working hard in the last game of one of the best coaches this league has ever seen in Daryl Stanley. I don't know what else you need in that great game gumbo for the game that was provided. And I think the oddest part is, Matt, and what I want you to speak to is when in pregame, I heard there was no Jeff Babbitt. It kind of throws their game plan out the window, sure. And obviously, the Empire, not that you're prepared for that because they found out day of as well, but it is something that you know what's going to happen. That's just Ben Yot moves over. He's comfortable playing the O line. He did it for multiple years. He won 2 MVPs doing it. So that is our solution to that. Then John Lithio goes down, and you say, okay, we're also okay because Oliver Chartok has played more than half of his points, even though he's been D-line the last few games. The first half of the season he played on that O-line, and he's comfortable there. Then Jagt goes down, and you go, wait a second, John Randolph is our secondary next to Yacht superstar move over to your O-line. So it seemed like New York, in theory, was built with their game plans just so much more prepared for the lack of Babbitt and the lack of Lithio in a way that DC wasn't, because DC struggled to get those blocks. Obviously, they had 4 turnovers, but like DC struggled to create the pressure required in a way that it just seemed like they were game planning for Babbitt and Lithio and prepared for those matchups. And when things changed, the things changed more for DC than they did even for New York.
It was hard to tell what DC may have game planned for or what they, adjusted to on the fly with the scratches in the rosters, but it just didn't look like they were taking much away. There were, a few points, maybe like first, second quarter, where everything got a little congested, Empire, whatever. But, at the last second or two, there was always somebody breaking free sideways for a release valve. And they just, they made it work. Even when they didn't look like they were using the full massive field size, they just still found a way. It just was, I don't know. DC didn't impress me on either side of the disc. Hate to say they all season long you kept reading or hearing from different people that DC Empire like de facto championship game, or whoever wins this is the favorite at least. And I don't know if I really ever bought into that. DC had, on paper, they look great, but they didn't put it all together at any point, and they just never looked like a championship caliber team, despite probably having the roster and a coach to potentially bring them that far. They just lacked some punch. It's hard to narrow down what it was. Was it? I don't know. There were good players all over their roster, and we talked about it previously. Like on paper, Babbitt and Lithio getting scratched changes it a little bit, but like that was probably the best 20 versus 20 rostered ever that I can think of, and it just it didn't really live up to the billing. Empire lived up to the billing.
Well, I think that's what happened. That the Empire, again, this is the Empire podcast, but I cannot understate what we saw in that game, because DC, they only had 10 turns in the whole game themselves offensively. And that Rowan drop was just so uncharacteristic and weird. So, I felt like it was really, the Empire earned like 7 or 8 turns, and then DC gave them that extra 2 or 3 by their own issue. Even that the Malks around throw to Jacques Nissen, which Brian Jones mentioned on the broadcast, that Jacques kind of needed to be in that spot on that swing when he was double teamed after Daryl had called the timeout. And that's one of those real what if moments. Like, why does Daryl call the timeout with Thomas Edmonds is one throw away? And obviously he wants to put his O-line back on the field. So Malks picks up, but that allows Yacht and Marquez to set up that double team, which has worked to good effect this season against everybody who isn't 6'2" or 6'3". Like that double team has been good. And for Jacques Nissen not to be right in the proper spot on that swing, now it's a turn, and then Jack screams to Marquez, "Go get there into the end zone," throws it up, and the Empire make. That's the difference, right, between DC and New York over the last 4 years. It's big plays. It's at New York. Even if DC gets 1 or 2 big plays, New York gets 4 or 5 every single time. And again, DC plays clean, only 10 turns in the whole game, and they even got a Callahan.
They were bad turns, though.
I know, but you told me before the game that DC had their offense had 10 turns and they had a Callahan in the game. I would have said, yeah, they were probably in it. They were probably 1 point away, and they could have won this game. 10, and I asking Daryl before the game too. I said, yeah, if you can limit to like 10, do you think you can win this game? And he said, 10 is great for us, sure. But he was much more concerned with turning New York over, saying that if they didn't turn New York over at least more than 10 times, they didn't have a shot. And he was right. Credit to Daryl. Daryl knew what the recipe for that, for him winning was going to be. but no Empire player had more than one turn, and all 7 main O-line players had at least 250 total yards of offense. They were all at least a +3, and they all had at least 4 total goals and assists. It wasn't just like one guy to point to. That O-line as a system just hummed and hummed and hummed, and that is the true credit to losing Babbitt and Lithio. And when I talk to Charlie and Anthony, it's a lot of lip service, coach speak about, oh, we have our system, we go game to game, people just play within their roles. And those numbers tell you what they are. I mean, I think the first time in that game that I, not to say breathed out and said, wait a second, I think the Empire, even without Babbitt, are fine, was the second Oliver goal. Because I was like, well, if Charles and Oliver are going to score as easily as they did, I don't know if DC has the recipe to get multiple breaks on this New York O-line that night.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The Empire players, when they've had to fill in on offense, they all find a way to contribute. Sometimes they contribute as throwers, sometimes they contribute as goal scorers, sometimes they're just the release valve in the middle of the field. I mean, Osgard didn't have a goals and assists impressive night, but he moved the disc all over the place, and he was just as important as ever. It looks a little different, not super high on the plus minus, but they all contributed in different ways when they needed to, and DC didn't have an answer for anybody anywhere really.
Well, let's talk about two guys in particular. You mentioned Oscar. Oscar averages more than 5 assists per game against DC. And going back to the game plan idea, that the two guys DC, I think, that maybe kept them up at night were Babbitt and Oscar, because those are the two that have really killed them the last 2 seasons. And yeah, for Oscar just to go out there in the flow of things, and he wasn't really necessarily pushed, but the rest of his teammates kind of were good enough that he was able to just kind of hum along and fit in that system, as I said. But two guys that I think you really got to highlight: Ben Jagt, 3 assists, 5 hockey assists, 8 goals, 28 of 29 completions, 687 receiving yards, setting the single game receiving yards record. And I know it's a more recent stat. We haven't had that for multiple seasons, but it's still a pretty crazy stat that he set that record. And you played with him in those AUDL. Well, you played for the first MVP with him, not the second, and you played with him on the O-line. Was that still, was that the best Ben Jagt performance ever? Like, I know there were, like, he had never caught a buzzer beater even until last season against DC. So it's not like you're going back and like, oh, we made all these huge plays. He's made a lot of big plays, but I think it was easily the cleanest game we ever saw from him. But is that the best Ben Jagt? Really, I'm watching that game and looking at the numbers after. I'm like, that might have been the most comprehensive, best performance from Ben Jagt in his career.
Yeah, maybe you could argue that some of like the game-saving layouts and other things, maybe against like Atlanta, he's made more plays on both sides of the disc, but in terms of just from a strictly offensive and efficient and clean, and were any of his goals even really contested? Even the one that like was hucked to Marquez, and Marquez kind of bodied out 2 people, or they tried to body him. Yacht just like trots in out of nowhere and he's like, okay, goal, easy, bye.
The assist,
it's like,
well, he had two big skies, one on Musa Shah and one on Merriman, and both of those I think were assists for him or hockey assists for him. So I don't think either of those were for the goal.
That's true.
But yeah.
But yeah, no, it seemed like he was on a whole nother level, just like running through the motions, where he probably had harder matchups in practice, in the weeks leading up to this. And this is like, you just go out and you run through the motions, and you have yourself a statistically impressive and crazy night. That was probably the best performance he's ever had, I guess.
Yeah, again, I agree with you. Atlanta was the only other one because he did it. He elevated that team to winning that game in a way that he didn't have to this time. Like, he was the guy in a way that, again, playoff Jack showed his head, and 2 goals, 6 assists, 3 hockey assists, 475 total yards, 32 of 32 completions, and he missed part of the game even. Playoff Jack, not say I was rolling my eyes beforehand, but, playoff Jack isn't a meme. I felt that was just like, oh, okay, are we just like narrative on the broadcast side of things? Are we just like narrative kind of pushing this too far and making a meme? But no, it's a prophecy. That playoff Jack is inevitable. It's astounding that it really is a real thing. I just like, there is credence to the idea of playoff Jack.
Yeah, when the lights are brighter, he plays better. And he's done that at multiple levels. There's really nothing else to say about it. It's a real thing. He's a slightly different person when the playoffs roll around.
Yeah, if he wanted an MVP in the league, if he could just do that for the first 12 games before that, I think he would.
Yeah, he's a real lazy slug out there, being one of the best players on one of the best teams during the regular season.
Right. Yeah. So another one of the key elements I think of this game too was the way that New York, and I credit to them, the way they handled the physicality and the different position that the refs were put in. Because that in the third quarter especially, there was that first collision between Jesper Tom and Wishmeyer Bailey. Then you had Weinberg almost get undercut in the end zone with a late layout. Then when the third one happened, which was Torrey Holland maybe getting a clean block on John Randolph, which wasn't really a collision. I don't know if that was a clean block or not, but that foul was called immediately. And not to say it was a makeup call, but I think the refs were trying at that point to curtail any extracurricular at all. And then you had right after that the Jagt incident, the incidental contact, I should say, with Tom. And, credit to both teams because when that happened and Jagt goes down with that collision with Tom, having just had that play with Wishmeyer Bailey, this game at that point could have completely boiled over, even though it was an accident. Like that still could have really boiled things over. But the multitude of mutual respect they have for each other prevailed in that moment. And, why I think, and one of the credits to this rivalry is for all of that physicality and all the trash talking and all the frustration they had with one another between those lines, there is nothing but mutual respect between those two teams. And yeah, there's some crossover and friendships and things off the field, but in that game, it felt like in the third it could have got even uglier when the frustration was boiling up for DC. And again, you could see that they were desperate when they went down by 3. They were desperate to find a way back. But again, a credit to New York, they were unbothered. Elliott Chartok and Wishmeyer Bailey and Jack in particular, they were just getting. I mean, it's like if you watch off the disc, not the disc, but if you watch off the disc, there was just so much grabbing and hands and jersey pulling and little stuff that the refs aren't watching because they're watching the disc as well. And even the ref that watches off, he can't catch everything. And there was just so much happening off the disc that, yeah, that credit to the Empire. They were unrattled. They were not worried about it. They were just going to play through it.
Yeah, I didn't love some of those early bad bids, like you said. I think the refs did a pretty good job of reeling it in, and truly hard to see from the stream again, but like maybe not a foul on the one they actually called, the unsportsman or whatever, where they try to reel it back in. But yeah, when you're an offensive player and you are like playing really well and you know it, and the other team starts like grabbing or pushing a bit and, just doing a little bit extra, even away from the disc, sometimes it's tough, especially, I mean, for me, I'm not very big. I was always one of the smaller players on the field. So yeah, sometimes it's initially hard to gain separation, but you also know, like, this player thinks they can't stop me unless they really are like grabbing, pulling, pushing, like doing a little bit extra. They don't think they can just stand near me, watch me cut and shut me down. They think they need to do extra to like really, really stop me. And as a great offensive player, that's almost like a boon to you. It's like, yeah, they can't stop me. Like, I just need to play through this. I need to just shimmy. Sometimes when they really start to lean on you and like whatever, sometimes you just shift and all of a sudden they're like that 1% off balance and then you take off and, you can use it to your advantage, which, I'd have to watch and see if anybody was really playing into it. But yeah, I mean, it didn't stop them clearly. So DC needed to do something else besides being overly physical to stop Empire. I think maybe some switches, some poaching, some other game plans, maybe switching some of the defenders around. I don't know. It's hard to say. One of the things I thought while watching the game, a lot of the teams, the top teams in the league, actually just a lot of teams in general, if you take like 3 or 4 of their main O-line players and put them on defense, they will probably give you a pretty good defensive performance, especially if it's just for a few points. Like, hey, you're our better players. You're playing on offense. Like, help us get a block here. I don't know if you can take some of DC's players and do that as easily. They're very good at offense and the way they all play offense together, which is why DC is a good team. But like, I don't know. You're not dialing it. You're not dialing in Johnny Malks. No offense, he's a good player, but you're not just like, hey, can you play a few D points and maybe wrap up a D here? And maybe you say the same thing about Elliott Chartok or Wishmeyer Bailey, sure, but I don't know. DC doesn't seem to have the interchangeable parts as much.
Well, I think Saul's an above average defender, and I think that's what makes that Empire O-line on defense so good about getting the disc back. Because again, you have Babbitt, you have Jack, and you have Wishmeyer Bailey, all three of which are above average defenders. And Daryl did do that when he moved Boxley over to D-line in that second half when things were desperate. But to your point, was that a little bit too late? at that moment. And how much can you ask of Christian, who is not only one of the better athletes in the league, but he's so essential, as you mentioned, to creating space on that O-line, not only for himself, because he can get open by blinking, but all the space that he created for Tyler Monroe, especially
Yeah.
downfield. And just, it's just, he that O-line hums because of Christian Boxley, really, and his movement. And
yeah. I mean, he played well. I mean, Monroe obviously had a great game, but they, I don't know. Ben Ort was kind of whatever. McDonald was nothing like the MVP caliber player he has been previously. I don't know. They have some players on defense that maybe you could have integrated them into offense at different points in the season and seen how it went. I mean, Joe Merrill is a good goal scorer. Maybe even AJ Merriman. DC turned it over a bunch with like bad deep shots against Ben Katz. It's like,
well, so that was what I was gonna say too. That was an interesting matchup. Like I learned like right before the game that it was gonna be Ben Katz, at least on their, we'll call it the D1 for New York, was gonna be on Ben Ort, and they were trusting themselves. Well, and the reason this changed too, and I was immediately the first point looking at this, because having Yacht on your D line with Katz means that you always have that help behind, right? So if Ort's going to go deep, they're going to hand that off, and Katz is always going to stay on the under. But without Yacht behind and Antoine having to chase around Boxley and Marquez up on a handler, you don't really have that height in behind to help peel off for Ben Ort's deep shots. And New York really, they said, okay, we're not going to change what we're doing. We're going to trust Ben Katz. And what was it, the second play of the game, I think, when they got that first break, that being New York, it comes from a Ben Katz box out and knocking the disc down. Like the disc also didn't float properly. It came down, but still, like Katz makes that deep block, and that kind of set the precedent. And at that moment, New York could say, okay, we do trust Ben Katz in this situation. And even late on in that game, when the game was so kind of in the balance, there were just too many bodies and too much athleticism and then too many smarts. So when Katz does get skied later on a deep shot, then he gets the hand block right away. You're watching it and you're going, he did it again. Like, even if you beat him, because he is, I don't know if he's as tall as I am, and that is not a compliment to him being an AUDL athlete, right? But yet, what makes him so special is the fact that he knows exactly what you want to do. So he was like, okay, I know that this, if we're in a double team here, this is going to be a backhand to the reset. So he just puts one big paw up and smacks it down, and he does it over and over and over again. And you talk about big moments, like, Ben Katz was huge in that game, and kind of shifting over to the D line now. Depth did it again for me. It really was like just the depth of full plethora, because the knock-on effects for Babbitt, if you could say Yacht replaced him, and surely Yacht replaced all of that Babbitt production, but now you lose Yacht on defense. So how is New York contending with that? Like, yes, Ryan Holmes, Matt Cat Stevens, you add them too, but they're good defenders, but they're not block getters. Like, Matt Cat Stevens has not recorded a block yet this season, and yet he has a terrific mark. He forces things in directions, and they force a war of attrition. And that is what, again, players like Holmes and Cat, and if Matt LeBar had been put in, like those kind of players, even if they don't get the blocks, they force you to throw 1,000 times, and they make you work, especially near the red zone. And I think in the fourth quarter, I believe around the 7-minute remaining mark, there was a point where the Empire were in a 2-3-2 zone with Antoine and Shank in the front doing the chasing around. And that was the point where I truly knew that game was already over with 7 minutes remaining. Because
yeah,
at that point in the fourth, if you have Shankalati and Antoine Davis just giving you everything for 90 seconds, and then that O-line for New York is just resting on the sideline, it just lets me know that, okay, Shank for a minute and a half, there was no answer. The DC O-line near the red zone had no answer. Eventually they did. Yes, they scored the point, but they took 90 seconds off the clock. And the only person who's gasping for oxygen is Shankalati, because Antoine is a machine. So, like, you have one player on that Empire sideline after 90 seconds of play gasping for air, and it is a player in Shank who is somewhere between on your roster playing D in the way he does point wise. He's somewhere between 15 and 20 as opposed to how many points he played in the game, right? And you expect your other 14 on the whether O-line or D-line to play more points than him. Same thing. The Empire D-lines are so deep that you go 90 seconds. You get that out of Ryan Dross and Jeff Holm on a different point. And even if, again, they score, it's 90 seconds. How big over the course of a game, 90 from Ryan Dross, 90 from Jeff Holm it just adds up. And now DC has 4 minutes remaining. So again, credit to Antoine too, by the way, on the personal side of things with family in Hawaii. It would have been really easy for him to lose focus or not bring his best in that game and been wavering and waning. But he looked 100% locked in, was ready to go. And that's a credit to both the athlete and the person behind the scenes too.
Yeah, that I mean, the defense smothered them. DC's, I think, a little too small bally. I touched on it a little bit with maybe needing some of the bigger, badder goal scorers out there to switch things up. I don't know if that's something they do moving forward next season. I mean, they have the players in the roster. It didn't seem like it all came together. And I don't think you're going to win a small ball grind against New York Empire. I know saying attack them deep sounds crazy when they have all those guys out there that can just, outrun you, sky you, whatever. But you still need to have the threat of it, and you need to attack a few times. And, maybe if they complete a few of those shots to or whatever against Cats, then, then Empire are switching, and then the matchup shift, and then it opens it up and it gets a little easier. But they just, I don't know, maybe they just didn't have enough, in-game reps against good competition, completing good deep shots, and you don't find your groove, and then, you give the Empire a 1 point advantage most quarters and you lose by 5. Yeah, I mean, that defense is as good as the Breeze defense can be. The Empire defense is just a whole nother level still.
Yeah, I mean, they have a number 1 defense in AUDL history, 14.3 scores against. Like, the numbers back up the arguments and the eye test of what we see. And
some of that, a tiny bit, is the change in clocks, because there are fewer points throughout the league.
Sure.
So I don't want to, yeah.
Well, also, like, Boston Boston was cut at half. And the first half of the Empire season this year was basically played in a monsoon for 3 of the first 5 games. So, yes, the scores were all lower across the board. That's why the Empire, the second half of the season, they were, I think, second in points. But the first half of the season, the Empire were like 6th or 7th in scores per game because, again, all the weather and the nasty conditions and things like that. So, yeah, point taken.
To give them back some of the credit I just took away, they also played a crazy hard schedule so far.
Yeah,
I mean, they've played the best teams from the best of it. Like, this is definitely the hardest schedule anyone's ever played, and yet they're still the best defense. So I'll give them their credit back.
Yeah, I mean, and they worked so hard this season to get home field advantage. And I could tell you, like, I was wondering, I don't know if they set the record for attendance on Saturday night, but it felt like it. It did feel like, and just looking out, it felt like there were more people than I had ever seen there potentially at Joseph Cecina Field, which is, again, a testament to the fact that people want to see the Empire. I mean, the biggest crowd for Salt Lake this year, I think, was also the Empire. The biggest crowd for Colorado, I think, was also the Empire. So it's just people are showing up to watch this team that's special. And now people will have to show up in Minnesota because while DC, they deserve to be there. Truly, Daryl Stanley deserved to be at at a championship weekend. And it's a shame. And my hat's off to Daryl. I've been watching him coach for a long time, and just a tremendous guy. And I wish him and the Empire, the whole family wishes them all the best. And I hope he continues to be around Ultimate in whatever capacities he chooses to be, because it really is up to him. And then for championship weekend, moving ahead, speaking of hard schedule and new teams, New York will now face the Austin Soul for the first time in their history on Friday, August 25th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, followed by Salt Lake taking on the Minnesota Wind Chill to follow. The winners meet in the championship game on Saturday, August 26th. Now, Matt, if you are Austin and Salt Lake and Minnesota, and you're looking to scout New York with or without Jeff Babbitt, how do you go about those two very different possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, how do you go about slowing them down? Because you're not going to stop any of those great players. Do you look to make the handlers swing it more? Do you just implement double teams in different parts of the field to get them out of their rhythm? And that could be successful without John Lithio out there. I mean, he had a lot of reps this year picking up when they expected to be double teamed, and just big body hammering it over the two players and finding a lot of space. If they're double teaming somebody else, it's hard to say that one of the great players won't be able to get out of a double team, but it adds a little more pressure. It makes it a little more possible. There are different things you can do, just switching, zoning, whatever. I mean, are you going to shut down the Empire and keep them to 15 goals in a game? Probably not. I can't imagine anybody doing that, but you got to go at it with some game plan. And, it's not always easy to pick your matchups, but I think you also need to be willing to switch them up rather quickly in a game and just see who can pressure certain people. It's just give them something a little different. And maybe you put a really big body not on one of the cutters that are killing everybody, but on a handler, and you just try and make it a little harder and give them a little different look, and they can't be the easy release valve. It's tough. I mean, I wouldn't want to be tasked with stopping these 7 to 9 individuals on this offense that just shred every defense.
Yeah, and I think Austin does. We saw in the Austin Atlanta game, they play a very similar style to Atlanta, which is big plays. They have some huge athletes, and they get it done over the course of wow. Basically, that's the wow factor.
Yeah, yeah.
If Austin has wowed us to a certain degree, I think they're still in the game. But if New York can kind of play their style, which is just grind you down, war of attrition, and make it 4 quarters and 48 minutes and not really consider too much about the buzzer beaters or the end of quarter plays or whatever. And if New York splits those, even like if New York wins the first and the third quarter, they've put themselves in a really good position against a team like Austin, again, who do make a lot of great plays. I mean, Kyle Henke is one of the best players in the league. Really exciting stuff. They have Evan Swiatek, and they know how to move the disc. They know how to find spots. And again, they've managed to make Atlanta, who going in on paper looked like the better team, and Austin said, no, like we're going to play our style, and you're going to meet us where we're at. And I think they did that, and they kind of let Atlanta kind of went to where Austin was, and Austin got the better of them in one of the wildest games I've ever seen laid on. But yeah,
the game had everything. It had a vintage Matt Smith amazing play, probably highlight reel top 10ish kind of thing, the greatest. It just had crazy blocks. It had the drama down the end. It had Atlanta 2 crucial drops. You could have won so many times over. I felt for those guys. Like you're watching it and you're just like, oh, you had it. And then you see how upset they were at the end. And been in similar situations, and it is heartbreaking when you feel like you let everybody down or you just didn't even live up to your own standard. Yeah, it's rough. But then on the other side of things, the Soul just kept punching them right back and back and back, and they eked it out, and it was super exciting. And I do think that obviously they're going to championship weekend. They're championship weekend worthy. I think they'll put up a decent fight against Empire. Maybe even a little better than Atlanta, just due to like the bizarre explosive factor and that Austin handling core. I think they might be a little more patient than Atlanta would have been. So I don't know. Excited to see how it shakes out.
Don't take the great ultimate we have coming up at championship weekend for granted, and we will talk to you again after that. So is it cold in Minnesota in August? I'll have to ask Oscar because I got to start packing. Matt, in the meantime,
think so.
I don't think so either. So enjoy championship weekend. And for everybody out there, we will see you soon.